Welcome to KC Grid Talk, episode number 17. Back again after a great weekend in Dowsman, Wisconsin, covering the Badger State Grand Prix. My name's Emory Lyda. I'll be joined in a moment here by my fantastic co-host, Kaleb Viesca, as well as Alexander Searle. But before we get started on this episode, I wanted to give a special shout out and condolences to the Birdsell family as one of the great legends of our sport and of American karting in general. Mike Birdsell passed away earlier this afternoon. Mike, of course, in his 70s, a very well decorated karting racer, karting mechanic, and just a member of the karting family as a whole. Mike, I mean, on the personal side of things, had a lot to do with me and racing, a lot of great stories with him in North Carolina. One of the most dedicated members of the karting paddock that I know. So, of course, I mean, really, really sad to see him go. But I mean, I've had so many great memories over the years. I know a lot of people around the karting community that had a lot of great memories with Mike Bird. So we're going to miss him at the track. I saw him within the last month or so at the USPKS race at Trackhouse in May. And I mean, it was awesome, obviously, catching up with him, hearing some of his famous stories. So, again, best wishes to the Birdsell family, and of course, remembering Mike's great life and all of the accomplishments that he did inside and outside of karting. We're going to miss one of the great badasses of the sport. So, yeah, with Mike Birdsell, one of the most respected members of the karting community, Alexander Searle, you had the pleasure of working with Jason Birdsell, meeting Mike as well. I mean, first off, some of your best memories of Mike Birdsell, and then second off, I mean, how are you doing on this good night?
Would be nice to unmute my microphone there, but I'm doing well up until the news that we got pretty fairly recently here. So yeah, Mike was an amazing guy. It was always great to see him around the karting paddock, like you said. I mean, he had so many good stories, and you were always just willing to sit down, get the popcorn out, listen to all of them because he had so many. For Jason as well, condolences to him. I hope he's doing pretty well. Jason and I obviously have worked together back in the past. We actually won a Grand National Championship together. So for the Birdsell family as a whole, my condolences go out to them. And for Mike, I mean, rest in peace to an absolute legend.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. I mean, both you and I worked with Jason a lot. I think I was able to hang out a little bit more with Mike because he lived down in North Carolina, and so we had a lot of interactions. We actually drove up to Newcastle with him a few years back, and my dad and I on this trip to Wisconsin, kind of hearing about the state he was in, we were talking about it and some of the memories we had stopping at some of the same locations. We one time blew a tire on the way up to Newcastle, and had this Mike and I were sitting in a diner for a solid hour and a half just talking about random karting stuff. So gonna miss the guy. Kaleb Viesca, you were kind of in the karting scene a little bit late to really know Mike that well, but of course, I mean, one of the legends of the sport.
True.
Yeah, but Kaleb, I mean, this weekend, again, with all the bittersweet stuff going on, I mean, talk to me about how you're doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, just got home from a 2-week stint. Obviously, went out to Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago for the Cup Karts North America pit race, and then we had our episode last week where we spoke to Greg Jasperson, and then was at Wisconsin from Tuesday, and then on till Monday afternoon. Then got here back to Houston yesterday, and then again. Today, found out the news of Mr. Mike Birdsell. So my condolences to the entire Birdsell family. Jason Birdsell, a driver coach who spends a lot of time in Texas as well. So my deepest condolences to that entire family. But I mean, it's been pretty good. Very, very busy summer stretch so far, and then we go back at it again this weekend. I shift my focus over to the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati for the next 2 weeks. I'll be there this coming weekend for the club race, and then obviously the Stars Championship Series in 2 weeks' time. But gonna do the long haul drive from Texas up to Ohio, 16 hours. So excited to do it with the other half of the Kart Chaser company, Trevor Blue. Gonna enjoy our 4th of July as well on Thursday. So yeah, Trevor Green. But yeah. Again, happy 4th of July to the entire karting paddock this weekend as well. Those of you guys who are going to be spending time either at the Route 66 championship this weekend at Whiteland Raceway Park, the one and only Big Red Zaner Clements is going to be there this weekend. So excited to see him go back out there. But On another note, boys, a lot of news this week coming out of the karting paddock. One of the big ones, the big guy, Danny Formal, moving teams over to Sodi Racing USA, and midsummer moves. They continue to happen here. Formal goes to Sodi Racing USA, and I mean, how surprised were you boys whenever you guys heard the news?
To be honest, not too surprised after the fact. I guess hindsight, it's more of a it's a Florida-based team, right?
Yeah.
So for Danny, obviously has the ties there. So in terms of you know once he decided to leave Rawson Performance Group, it's kind of which team he's going to go to. I kind of assumed it was going to be a Florida-based team, but the options were still quite big for him. But decided to go with Sodi. South Florida-based team. Spends his time at Homestead, often enough when he can. So I'm excited to see what this pairing can do now. Obviously, with Isambard going to KA, basically full time on the national calendar. Sodi was down. They had Talon. Talon announces now, he's no longer going to be part of Sodi, so it's going to be basically just Danny's team. So I'm really interested to see kind of what that pairing is going to be like.
Yeah, I think it's a big signing for Sodi to kind of rewrite the ship, so to speak. I mean, let's face it, they've had some good results this year, certainly in the KA side of things. We saw Alan Isambard come out on fire in his first two KA starts, but you lose out on Harley Keeble. You've kind of got the uncertainty of Dalton Haynes up in the air. You don't really have much going on in the shifter. I mean, Yako had some good races at Stars, but not really a podium result as of yet. So I think that for Sodi's side of things, to get a star signing like Danny Formal and understanding what that does not only for the on-track side of things, but also the off-track, and being able to kind of nurture and help some of the younger drivers as well with one of the biggest arrive and drive and coaching platforms in the paddock. I think it's a big deal for Sodi Kart. I'm really interested to see how Sodi Racing USA does with Formal. I think that their shifter package is at a lot of pace in the U.S., pretty much no matter who's been on it. So with Formal coming in, one of the most storied shifter drivers in American karting history, I think it's going to be a good addition for the team, a good addition for Formal, and certainly, I mean, you go now to the opposite side of things with Rawson Performance Group, with Formal kind of being the headline driver for RPG. It makes you wonder now, do they bring Maureen Krimmers back a bit more? We saw him at
They
Cincinnati,
have
but he
to.
wasn't racing. Um, or what do you do on the shifter side? Do they kind of focus back on the single speed? There's a lot of questions to be asked on the RPG side. And, a couple of weeks ago with Harley Keeble leaving Sodi, we were like, it's great for NRMS. There's a lot of optimism on that side, but you ask a lot of questions about Sodi. Now, great for Sodi. Have a lot of things answered on their end. Now you ask questions about RPG.
Very, very well said. Because now, the exact same position that Sodi was in a couple weeks ago. Now you find that RPG team in the same position, right? They now have to force a hand, whether they sign somebody else or try to snag somebody else from a different team or start to bring Marin back a little bit more. So we'll definitely see how all that stuff plays out. But yeah, big news coming out of the Sodi Racing USA camp this week, and good to see Danny in different colors. I mean, we know how Danny is and how he's going to perform, but boys, a little bit of a recap here of what ensued this weekend. A couple of winners, an X30 Pro, Austin Garrison, round of applause. Goodness gracious. He won that race by a pretty big gap. The Speed Concepts Racing and Speed Lab Racing Engines team won both of the X30 classes. An engine failure for Chico Brown in X30 Junior after leading. And then on the other hand, a big crash at the end of the X30 Pro main event, and then Austin Garrison winning that one. But I mean, a good couple of results in KA Senior as well. Mick Gabriel getting his first national victory in a 2-cycle category, if I'm not mistaken. So round of applause for Quick Mick as well. People said he was washed, whatever, but he got it done. Another guy who also a lot of people said was washed, Emory Lyda, found himself close to the top 10 this weekend as well before putting it in the pillows. Emory,
Hey, still
how was
close
your
to the top
weekend?
10.
How was your
Hey.
weekend, bro?
So first off, after qualifying, Kaleb said I should hang up the helmet and retire. And you know what? I can't blame him, because that was one of the worst performances I've ever put on in qualifying. Qualified P29, Me and Donovan Bonilla were in the same group right behind each other. Dono was like 20th, and at that point I was like, it may be over. Saturday was pretty good. Heat races were good. We moved forward each heat race, but it's tough to pass in Dallas when you lose so much time. And we had top 9 pace in all 3 of our heats, at least like in the split group. So like no worse than 18th overall, but we could only make up so many spots. And then the main event, we started 21st, drove forward. A lot of it was due to attrition, but we did make 4 or 5 on track passes. We were up to I think 11th or 12th, and then coming into the sweeper, James Overbeck and Luke Welcome got together, and I think Ryan Persing as well might have been a bit involved in it. But the 3 of them got together. They were on the exit curb. I was about 6 cart lengths back from him at the point. I see the yellow flag. I see them on the exit curb, and I just completely ran out of talent. I went on the marbles on the entrance to the corner, hit the brakes, and if you don't know, if you weren't here at Dowsman this past weekend, the marbles offline was killer. And so yeah, I hit the brakes. The cart went slipped away, went through the grass, narrowly avoided the barriers, came back on, and then spent the last 5 laps in a hornet's nest. But we ended up 14th. We had a package that could have finished better than that if there was a bit of a better driver in it. But hey, I mean, to finish top 15 in a KA race, to survive all the madness, I think there's positive steps. We made I feel like every weekend we've gotten better this year. I think we're close to where we need to be. And I don't know what my next race is going to be, but I think it was a good step. One other thing here, as Chase Gassiet-Lee mentions here, Steven Isert on Thursday, quick shout out because he sent some poor GFC driver straight over my shoulder in practice. I had to take 3 ibuprofen after that because my shoulder was like seriously hurt. Like this is serious stuff here. But no, I mean, practice day crashes, practice day shenanigans. When you run 45 karts in K, it gets pretty rowdy out there.
Yeah, and they didn't split up the was it the Thursday practice?
Yeah, did not split it.
It wasn't split, so that was surprising to me. But Dowsman did deliver some good racing. It was a very different racetrack, new racetrack for a lot of drivers. I think some of the stuff that drivers weren't ready for. I heard various different things that the first couple of corners, you kind of lacked a little bit of grip, and then you got to the last 2 and you were just way too gripped up. And we actually have a clip that we can play here. That's actually my clip, so we'll watch it here of all the grip. This was at the end of Saturday of the grip on the racing line, and you see how grippy it is. Literally, my shoes stuck on the racetrack. It's crazy. And this is the type of grip that'll take your shoes off.
That's wild.
Crazy grip. So that's very, very. I mean, I had never seen anything like it before. I'm pretty sure you boys have been on the sport longer than I have. The new compound, is supposed to be a little bit softer. Is supposed to lay down that little bit more of rubber. And what'd you guys think after seeing that?
Yeah, so one thing to note about that section, what you were mentioning, the first 8 corners of the racetrack were repaved, I believe, in 2023. I talked to Wes Steege, who was a big part of the repaving process at Badger Kart Club and Millwright Raceway. And again, I mean, it's a new surface, but it is still lacking a good bit of grip. And then you get to the back half of the track to the Rhino liner, which was added in 2017. If you have never driven a track with Rhino liner, you drive on it for the first time on a Thursday, like when the track is still getting rubbered up, and it feels really sticky. It feels like you send it in. You drive it on Sunday on new tires in the main event, like it is really sketchy. And for someone that has the size that I have and is up in the seat a little bit more, a little bit bigger on the side.
Big guy.
We don't skip too many meals. And so because of that, you come through that corner and you try to send it on in there. That cart just wants to go up on 2 wheels and flip over. So
and I have very similar experience to that because obviously I drove at Pittsburgh, and there's Rhino liner in every single corner. So
It's different in Pittsburgh though, because in Pittsburgh you have it's like the patches of Rhino Liner, right? So
Hmm.
it's like the center line is Rhino Liner. In
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
like
Dowsman,
oh,
there,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
in
enter, yeah,
Dowsman,
you enter
I
off
see
of
what
it.
you're saying.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
yeah, there's no way to get away from it. You enter the corner, you exit the corner, center of the corner is full Rhino Liner. So I have race pit. I've gone on two wheels in pit. It's not fun, but Badger's a different level. And Sunday was the most rubber I've ever seen laid down on Rhino Liner. It was pretty nuts to go through. And I think, it caught people out. I think it's one of those things that, like, if you were a local, you might have never driven times like that. I talked to Josh Oates after warm up when he did a 44.9, and he was like, "Yeah, that's the fastest I've ever driven a K or an X30 around here. Up until one session ago, was the fastest time ever driven around here on an X30." And then Garrison goes in and does a 44.6 in warm up. It's just like the amount of grip on that track doing 46s in K is ludicrous.
Yeah, pretty nuts that weekend as well. We said it was good to be back. I mean, George Saraki is one of the big reasons that we went back um, to Dowsman, Wisconsin. I mean, the work that man puts in, and the work that the entire club group there at Dowsman puts into that entire racetrack is really, super great to see that entire hardworking crew go at it and try to bring a national event back to Wisconsin. A lot of people said a lot of things about the track, and I'm really going to keep it super real and whatever people, were worried about the size of the racetrack and whatnot. And, called it whatever in Wisconsin so far, low entries, but the racing, in my opinion, was really good and really mixed it up for a lot of people because it was a driver's racetrack. And Emory, you drove the racetrack this weekend. I mean, what did you think about the racing in general? What did you think about the track? What did you think about the entire, I guess, facility as one?
I love driving the track. I think it's one of my favorite tracks to drive in karting simply because of the challenges that it requires you to kind of drive the cart two different ways depending on what corner it is. The first half of the track is very much roll speed, very much trying to carry as much exit speed as possible and really sort of maximizing the kind of the amount of speed you can carry without overdriving the cart. Overdriving kills you. Um, the back half of the track was very much about being able to carry as much entry speed as you could in the Rhino Liner without unsettling the cart, and you really had to kind of hustle the cart into there to make time. And so, for me, I think it was one of those things that, like, the track presented a lot of challenges. I think the racing on the track, there's a lot more technique into it, a lot more strategic variance that comes along when the overtaking is hard to do, and you can't just kind of draft by people. The one thing I will say, the one thing about the racing that I felt like was um, lacking of it was, to me, there's no reason to run 45 karts on that track. And as someone that drove in the final with 45 karts, I told my dad on the grid, I was like, I could end up being in 10th after one lap. I could end up being on my head after one lap. And either way, there's really not a whole lot I can do to control it. And
Yeah.
I think it gets to that point where it's kind of a bit of a safety concern when you have that many karts on the track, and it's let's face it, it's too narrow to really drive that many karts out there. I think one-on-one racing, pack racing, great for the track. I love Dowsman. I think it's a great track to drive. It really, to me, it teaches the young drivers a lot. It forces you to kind of grow up when it comes to driving different sorts of corners and making real technical overtakes. But the field sizes were too much for that track, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you make. Well, for one, the track being narrow, I think played into the racing being really good. I just think because it's a racetrack that we don't go to very often, especially on the national level, of course, it kind of threw a wrench in things, right? A lot of teams have data on a lot of racetracks. This is one of them where if you're not really local to the Midwestern area, Wisconsin, or this track as a whole, you don't really know what to expect until you got here either the week prior doing some testing or the Thursday that you arrived here on the racetrack. And even that didn't prepare you for what the weekend had in store with how much grip was being laid down on the
Absolutely
racetrack.
not.
It was a
It
different
was
racetrack. When I talked to Harley and DeTulio at Homestead when they were there the week before USPKS, they were doing 48s in X30 with how little grip was on the racetrack. And as it picked up, they were down to the 46s during that weekend before it rained. They're doing 44 sixes in that final in
well the
X30.
The pole time for K Senior on Friday was a 46.8 by Mick Gabriel, or not by Ossinger, excuse me. Fast lap in the final was a 46.4, and in warm up on Saturday or on warm up on Sunday, I believe it was something like the top 14 would have been on pole position based on the time that Zers did. If you look back at happy hour, where Alex Feldstein was quickest, you're talking about the top 30. I think it's the top 35 in terms of fastest lap in the final were quicker than the fast lap in happy hour. And yes, you can say that there were storms, but like if you look at what we were doing on Thursday, it really wasn't any different. So the track rubbered up a ton from Friday afternoon, even between happy hour and qualifying, all the way through to Sunday. And again, I think there's part of it's the tire compound, but in terms of preparation, it's it's definitely something that's different when it comes to that compared to a local race. And you can see that in the times. Last week when they did the shootout, the fast time was a 47.2 in KA, about a 45.4 in X30. Both of those times have put you damn near dead last when it came to the actual racing itself. So I think that it just shows like the track evolution made it really, really difficult to get accustomed to.
Yeah, but besides track evolution, which played into the racing as well, I think it was one of those things where we don't have a whole lot of locals in this area, so a lot of drivers have to get used to it pretty fast. And I think it's a good thing that we go to these style racetracks. That's why for next year, I really hope that as a series that people start going to racetracks where it's not the norm, right? It's not just we obviously have to go to the Newcastles and the track houses and the GoPros Orlando, like those are the staples. But there should be other racetracks that we go to that are kind of we don't go here very often. I think a track that I can throw out there right now um, was the track that we went to in Colorado
Grand
for
Junction.
Grand Junction. That track, unbelievable to race on. I've only heard good things about it. Even the Car Chaser crew went out there, did some laps, and they were like, "This is one of the best tracks they've driven in quite some time." So I think that's a racetrack that we can go to with bring back Shawano. Shawano, elite racetrack. When K1 opens up eventually, that's going to be a good track, especially for the guys out west over in California area. So I think I'm excited for the next year or two. I think in terms of getting to that, what track should we go to debate. I think we're in store for some good stuff there. But for Badger, glad we could have gone. For George Siraki, really good to do it for him as well. Obviously, he has the Geo Cup named after him. So yeah, just I was really pumped that we got to go to Badger, and I think the racing really lived up to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this real quickly from Joseph Montien. First off, great weekend on track for Enzo. And I know that the K final, the post race deck did not go the way that he would have wanted to. I mean, look, I've been there in the last 7 months with the squish gap. Not something that takes away from Enzo at all. It's still an impressive drive, especially on that track with how much he was able to put on the field throughout the weekend. I mean, Amador Martinez gave it absolutely everything throughout the weekend, um, including a really, really tough battle in the final. But for Enzo, a good weekend there. Jonas's comment though, 45 carts kind of risky, but it was nice to keep all the kids in the final. It worked out surprisingly okay. I will say, the K Junior final was very well driven in my opinion. Like I think to me, that was the best KA junior race that I've seen all year in terms of the racecraft, not just from the top five, but through the midfield as well, because I was able kind of keep an eye on that on the grid to see what sort of I could expect. The senior final, I think, to be completely blunt, was kind of embarrassing from a racecraft standpoint. There was a lot more crashes, a lot more than we saw in the heat races, 21 penalties in total. Um, a lot of white lining, which I mean the track kind of is conducive to that in the first place, but I felt like the overall racecraft standards in the K senior final is worse than the K junior. And again, I think from a personal standpoint, I love seeing the racing. I felt like it produced really good racing. From a safety standpoint, with the amount of carts out on track, with especially how narrow the track got on the start, I feel like it'd be a matter of times before we saw something go wrong. So I think that's my one point of contention on that is I feel like 45 carts played out all right in the two finals, all things considered from a safety standpoint, but definitely felt a bit sketchy out there. And
So
especially, what's up?
I just to touch on that point as well. I just want to know what you guys think of. This is a good topic to bring up about too many go karts, whatnot. Do you think it should be track dependent, or should we kind of have like a rule in place, obviously series dependent, of course, but for max amount of go karts that should enter a final? Because I mean, Newcastle could obviously hold 70 if you wanted to in that straightaway, but for a track like Badger, I think 30, 34 is probably the max it could hold.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's track dependent. I think we've seen in Newcastle they've run 75 at Summer before. That was too much. But when it goes to like normally they can run up to 60 at Newcastle and be fine. 50 at Trackhouse, 48 to be exact. I talked to Dan Brewer about this is the maximum that they're willing to do from a safety standpoint. But again, I think Badger's one that you're closer to 30 to 33, and USPKS has done this in the past. It's worth noting. In Ocala of 2019 through 2021 in Ocala, when they would do LCQs there, it would be 30 to 36 carts in the main. I think it was 36 was the max they would do. Then they'd go to GoPro or to Newcastle, and it'd be closer to 60. So I think like they've done it in the past. I think having a track dependent one where you talk to the track owners, the track club, and get a feel for what they're comfortable with, what the staff is comfortable with working with as well. And USPKS does have an advantage on the race director side of things. They actually had a surplus for this weekend where they had Alex Brignoli kind of as an alternate race director as well. So from a manpower standpoint, they had enough to where you had kind of the staff you needed. But I do think the safety side of things is dependent on the track.
Yeah, and I mean to that too, right? You said they had a surplus this weekend, but whenever you have more than that, either 36, 34, you start missing calls, right? You have a lot of guys either glued on the front of the pack or the middle of the pack or wherever it gets close. You miss calls throughout the pack. So I kind of agree with what you guys said, kind of just picking out what works for the club at a place like Badger. Could have had a little too many this weekend. But I mean, it worked out all right. Calls were definitely missed at some point in the weekend. At somewhere in the field that happens in racing whenever you have this many drivers out there. And how spread out the field was this weekend as well,
But
right? It was something
yeah,
that we haven't seen so far.
but one thing I will say that impressed me, and this is kind of a little bit of observational stuff, is I was watching the penalty boards in my races, and the amount of times that they picked up warnings for guys that were 5 or 6 spots behind me. That quite honestly, like
That is true.
if I
That is true.
objectively, if I was race directing, right, and there's guys racing for 18th out of 21, which I'm not going to name names, but there were guys in the heat races getting significant penalties for multiple warnings in the heat race. Like I wouldn't do it. So at least when they split the grid to 22, I felt like they were able to get everything. When they got into the main, I'm sure they missed things. It's natural, but
Correct.
USPKS did a really good job kind of looking through the
Yeah.
grid, and I think their race directing um, kind of the structure that they have with their race direction is really kind of something that helps them out a lot, and it lets them get away with more. But even then, still, I think 45 was too much for this track.
I think you bring up a good point with the race directing. I heard a lot of drivers say like, "Oh, there's too many calls and whatnot." I said, I would usually respond with, "I'd rather there be, a surplus of calls and then you have to take some back,
You can
than
always protest.
yeah." But it's really hard to give somebody a penalty after the fact. You could always protest it. So that's kind of that's my go-to response. There's a fine line. There's a balance, right? You don't want to come off of a final and have 55 penalties to go and review. But like you said, in the K senior final, there was 21. A couple of those were, double and triple on one driver. But other than that, I think USPKS did a fantastic job. With that many go-karts on a small racetrack like that, it's hard to kind of keep an eye on it all. And I think that they did a great job. I think like their mindset towards it is great. Just make the call that you see on the racetrack and then deal with it afterwards.
True. Emory, anything else to add to the field size?
Yeah, just in general, like I said, I think 45 was too much, but I think it did provide good racing. And to be clear, the KA side of things and the racecraft that we saw in the KA final, like Bonilla and Vasquez are still getting together, whether there's 10 carts on the track or 45 carts on the track. Kane Martin and AJ Myers still going to get together no matter how many carts are on the track. Terlecki as well with, forget who got into him there. I don't know, but either way, there were still going to be crashes up and down the field, regardless of how many carts were on the track. That was not the reason that it was a rough final, in my opinion. But safety-wise, race directing-wise, I think we needed less carts on the track, and I think Going forward, when we go to more bull ring tracks like this, which is a great track to have, you need, like Alex was saying earlier, I like seeing the differences, the kind of variability in tracks and the styles of tracks we go to, but you need to make an adjustment to the field size because I think that 45 is too many. And yes, you'll get some people upset that they'll miss the A main, but that's part of life, right? Like at the end of the day, if you have 11 sessions on the weekend at that point to get yourself into the A main, you still have a B main that you could qualify through. If you can't do that, it's kind of a skill issue.
Yeah, very, very good point. There's only 20 drivers in Formula One. There's only so many in IndyCar. There's only so many in NASCAR. So just got to do what you got to do to make it into the show. But we still have a lot more to come your guys' way. This is only half of our show done here, but a lot more to come after this quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere.
Colin, I need a new 219 chain. I need a 77 tooth roof sprocket. I need some more chain lube, and I need it probably as soon as like tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, are you even listening? Like, we need this to run this weekend.
Want anything else?
What do you mean?
I already got it in the car on Acceleration Kart Racing's online store, bro. All orders over $200 get free shipping.
Oh, throw in a set of tires.
Done.
Everything you need, all in one place and shipped to your door for free on orders of $200 or more. Exclusions apply. Shop AKR.com.
Alrighty, welcome back to KC Grid Talk. Myself, Kaleb Viesca, Emory Lyda, and Alexander Searle. All of our Instagram handles here are our name tags. So if you guys want to give us a follow, send us a text or probably not a call. I won't answer. But you guys want to send me an Instagram reel or something funny, I will definitely be sure to like it and not just ghost you and leave you on red. But still a lot more to talk about here, boys. We couple of other topics that we have here. We practiced a lot for this weekend. This was a new track for a lot of people. We had a big money race last weekend at or 2 weekends ago, I should say, here at Millwright, and a lot of teams came out to practice, whether it's a test, whether it's to do whatever. We've talked about it before, but practice in whatever it is. What do you guys think about it? Are we practicing too much? Are we not practicing enough? I know what I think, and I am very, very strong-minded about what I think, but I'll let you guys – I think we all think the same thing on this topic, but I'll let you guys go ahead.
We drive way too much. We drive way too much.
Practice too much, and we don't race enough is the way I'll put it.
I almost disagree with that too. To me, there's a fine line. I'm not a big fan of, 5 heats. 6 heats, or you know what I mean? I think there's too much driving in general, and as a whole, karting.
Alex is a lazy guy.
No, people have just gotten so accustomed to me. Okay, let me make this clear.
But don't misunderstand it. It's only 3 heats. I'm not saying we need to add more racing. I think 3 heat races.
I think 3's too much. I think 3's too much.
Dude, what? I think 3 is the perfect amount.
So let me make this clear though. I think I'm talking about specifically the pro guys. I think for practice, no matter what, we do too much of it. But if the pro guys for the shifter, when we have shifter, and for the X30 guys, if they want to be considered pros, right? Because that's what we're kind of pinning them to be, because they are the pros of karting.
Correct.
We drive too much. You look at any pinnacle of motorsports. There's never a time where we are driving the week before at the same racetrack for 5 sessions a day. We go on the Thursday and we drive 4 or 5 times. Then Friday, there's 4 practices. Then you qualify. Of course, that puts the advantage to all of, and this is not a diss or anything, but the big teams will always prevail in a situation. And I think it makes, for one, the racing not as good, because it makes it harder for a guy like Eli Warren, for example, to come into the mix and be fast compared to a team that has just more luxury of being able to test more often than he does, right? Or for any privateer, for a driver on a small team who wants to make the step up to the big leagues, to the X30, to the shifter side of things, it's hard to do. And that's because I think partly due, besides all the obvious other reasons, that we just drive too much. And so if we get rid of that, and this is a totally separate topic, because then it's how do you police that? It's tough. And I understand that it's tough for a series to basically tell a racetrack, listen, you cannot allow guys to practice a week before. And if I was a racetrack, I would say, listen, I'd want more money then from the series at that point, to make that happen. So policing it is very difficult, but I'm open to anybody in the comments that has any ideas, or for you boys as well, because I think there's no reason why somebody should be there a week before testing and then also testing 8 times before we actually get to qualifying.
Yeah.
I disagree with the weekend before testing with whatnot and showing up to a racetrack or booking a racetrack to be able to test.
I think you muted yourself, Kaleb.
I just muted myself there. Sorry. Whether it's booking a racetrack or whatnot, or the weekend before, the weekend prior, or whatever it is. I mean, obviously last weekend they had the millwright shootout, and that was pretty cool to give out some money and the swords that they gave out. But I mean, 3 heats gives you more than enough time to either make up or lose as much as you want during the race. 3 heats gives you a chance
That's part of racing,
recovery in
though.
case of a bad qualifying or crash in some of the heats, right? I mean, you don't have a pre-final. I spoke to Ashton Woon's dad as well this weekend. He said he liked the 3 heats because, there's not a pre-final that if you crash in the pre-final, you go to the back of the grid and then you have to start from the back of the grid. You can kind of race your way up in the main event. It's kind of an average of everything that you did in every single one of the heat races. And you're allowed to kind of work your way up the field after either it's a poor qualifying or whatever it could be, right? But I really think that we're practicing a little bit too much. Even the Thursday track ran practice is a little bit excessive in my eyes. Yeah, it gives a lot of people time to test and whatnot, but I think showing up with what you got, showing up either on the Friday, makes it cheaper for either teams, for families that go out and race. You don't have to run a separate engine. You don't have to buy another set of tires, and that's a lot of money that you can save, right? If you cut it down to 3 days, and if you cut it down to a little bit of a shorter time, it's literally, you save so much money in the hindsight. You don't have to pay the extra $100 to the track I mean, obviously nothing against, tracks or whatever, making their money on the track ran practice, right? Because I'm all for that. I'm all for supporting local tracks and all that stuff. But I think the way we're going about things is just taking a little bit too overboard now with whether it's practice. We're not on the racetrack enough, because you spend 3 days of practicing and you spend 2 days of racing. Let's just go straight into it and start racing from the get-go, right? You get there Friday, you practice, qualify Friday afternoon, and race Saturday and Sunday. That's the way I look at it. I think that's the way it should be. Stars is obviously that way. You're not allowed to practice. The layout's either a little bit different. And I really like that layout. I think if USPKS could have, just the 3 days, I think it would be cool. SCUSA, I think they have Wednesday practice even at SCUSA now this year, if I'm not mistaken, boys.
I believe it's like unofficial-ish for practice. I think Emory froze.
Yeah.
On our stream, but yeah,
I was like,
either
why is he
way,
staring at me like that? I think you.
But yeah, you make a good point with the SCUSA stuff. I think
Yeah.
Stars does a great job with not allowing excessive practice. So they do a good job kind of policing that, and I think that's why whenever you go to Stars weekends, it tends to be a lot closer to start, at least because there's limited practice. Even on the official testing days that leads into qualifying, there's not as many practices as we have on a normal national weekend. So it's something to figure out for all the series. I think every single series can kind of learn from each other on where kind of the feedback is. But for me, I've seen people in the comments kind of saying that it was different this weekend because it had rained, and I agree 100%. But on a normal weekend where it is sunny all the way through, and we're practicing from Thursday, even Wednesday sometimes, Thursday, and then Friday we finally qualify. I mean, everybody's got it figured out. And then the teams that have more resources are going to have it figured out faster than you and probably better than you.
Yeah.
And so at that point, like if you're on a mid-sized team, a small team, or by yourself, you feel behind the 8 ball all weekend long.
Yeah.
And it makes it a little bit less fun for those guys, right? So I think to me, like you show up Thursday, maybe Thursday, Friday, you practice 4 times, then you do qualifying. That's enough practice to kind of have things figured out. I think it makes the baseline a little bit tighter, and usually it tends to have a more shaken up field for qualifying. I know it's not. I know it's. I know racing is all about who's the fastest and whatnot, and less about the entertainment side of things. But if you look at any sort of pro level of racing, when you go to the car level, there's never this much practice. Even on my level of car racing, we practice twice. Practice twice, and then we qualify. That's it.
Yeah,
unless you want to pay for extra time on the racetrack the week prior.
Correct. And another good point here by Brody Karts. Tent fee, mechanic, tires, motor, track fees, everything adds up. And it really gets expensive. Starts to dig holes in whether it's parents' pockets, sponsors' pockets, and whatnot. So definitely something that we will continue to either talk about or fight about as we progress. We wait for Emory to come back, but still a lot of other topics. We talked about Eli Warren, and you made the good point of how difficult it is really to be a privateer now in the X30 field with all the big budget teams, with all the teams that either fund for or pay for the extra practice sessions on the weekends before or whatnot. So, the likes of Eli Warren, big shout out to him and his dad, Keith Warren, for coming out and racing against some of the best drivers in the nation, some of the best drivers in the world in the X30 Pro class, and trying to do the best that they can race in that class, right? So he still did pretty good, all things considered. He was on I believe he told me it was one of Jeremy Fletcher's old X30 engines, and ran that, and then did a lot of stuff with that. They built up the X30 chassis or whatever, and then they were able to get it done. But a really good shout out. And then going back to the point here, it was obviously no Wednesday practice on SCUSA, just Thursday. So thank you to Jonas Videmontien for that. And then the as well USPKS format.
I will say what I like about PKS's format a lot. I think the 3 heats. I like the 3 heats. It makes it really entertaining. I still think maybe one too many heats, but I like that they're long heats and then really long finals. I think that's what it should be. I think the heats are short enough where if you make a mistake, you don't have enough time to bounce back, but they're also long enough to where you can kind of carve your way through the field if you had a bad qualifying. And with the really long main events, you have to learn about tire wear, especially if you don't get especially for the KA Masters guys who didn't get new tires. Which is awesome. I think it saves money for those guys as well. But especially for the X30 guys, they have to save their stuff because the rubber burns off pretty quickly. So on a 25 lap main, I think it teaches you a lot. So I think for PKS's format, I think they did a great job on lap count for sure.
True. Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it comes to racing, there's no doubt that you're getting your money's worth with USPKS, whether it's racing, laps, track time. You're definitely doing a good job. So, and then we have even more comments coming in. One from Mount El Sol. You are on account for the economic ripple effect that follows. Teams will have less income to pay pro drivers. So, and he just said you aren't accounting for the ripple effect that follows. Teams will have less income to pay pro drivers. So kind of goes back to what we were saying, right? The more you spend on practice, the more you spend on motors, the more you spend on whatever it is. And if you don't have as many paying customers under your tent to help you pay, balance the fact that you need to pay a pro driver this week or pay for a pro driver's entry. If you don't have as many customers, you can't run a pro driver that weekend. If you don't have whoever running this weekend and paying the big bucks to run under your tent, you're not going to have the big and the fancy drivers to come out and race for you. And that's kind of the sad fact of our sport today,
Yeah. Well, and also too, like at the end of the day, if you look at the amount of people that wouldn't come to these races because it simply is too expensive to run 2 days of practice than 2 days of racing, and the amount of tires, the amount of gas, the engine costs that rise as a result of that, I think that you would see if Mike Rollison or anyone else, or Thierry, or anyone else who's running a team, Sean Bailiff, has one extra customer in a weekend, that will account for the extra practice time that they're losing out on, the amount of extra practice resources, because they're charging enough for their tent space, enough for their coaching and their entire package, that it makes it worthwhile. Or that one customer will make more difference than all of the extra practices combined, especially if they don't have a tire dealer, if they don't do engines in-house. So I think for me, the argument about pro driver or teams needing the extra day of practice is a little bit misguided. I think the track owners is the biggest thing for me that I
Yeah.
feel like is losing out by not having an extra day of practice.
True.
And it's tough to, in a market where we're already struggling to have enough tracks that I think are willing to step up to the plate, that are willing to put in the budget to host a national event and have the paddock space to do it. I think alienating them with one less day of practice sometimes is kind of a tough sell. But like people have been saying in the comments, I have no idea exactly what you guys said because my power went out for a solid 8 minutes.
Fix your power,
But
pal.
I think,
Can't do much else.
yeah, massive skill issue. But
Yeah.
I think that the stars format is the closest to what I feel like an ideal practice format should be, where you have 4 practices. End of the day on Friday, you get into qualifying, you roll from there.
Mhm.
I think it's a slippery slope to ban testing before the weekend, because teams will just go 1 weekend earlier. If they had
Yeah.
ban testing a full 7 days in advance, well, they'll be there 10 days in advance. So I think that that's tough to do, but what Stars does kind of limits it, and it's the closest thing that we have to what I felt like testing was back when I was kind of in my prime in KA, so to speak, where it's like you didn't have Thursday practice, right? And so
Yeah.
for my happy self that was in grade school at the time, I was able to go through an entire national season, only miss a few days of school,
Mhm.
because you'd miss Friday, but you wouldn't have to miss all of Thursday. You wouldn't have an extra day. Like, I look at it like we left for Dowsman on Wednesday, and that's for a race that we're not on track for qualifying until Friday afternoon, and yet we're there a full 2 days earlier. During the school year, that's really tough on kids. Now, granted, I think there's ways to go around it. There's online classes or whatnot, but that's an example. The logistics, the amount of time that you have to kind of reserve for a weekend for 2 extra days of practice that isn't overly representative, I think is just overkill. I think the racing structure is fine. I like 3 heat races. I think it gives you a good opportunity. I'm still, I would say, probably a little bit more partial to split day schedule, but I understand both sides of it. But I definitely think we have too much week to week practice. And one other thing too that I think is notable as well is that ultimately it's pointless. Like, what you do on Thursday, how you set up the card on Thursday, it's good for the driver to kind of get an eyesight into it. But most of the tracks we go to, the difference between Thursday and Sunday is big enough now with the new tires to where you're kind of just putting extra laps, spending more money on tires that
Track
ultimately
learning.
aren't really needed.
I think it's
Yeah,
just
like,
track learning at that point.
and you
Like
sh- and
if
you
you
sh-
if you
you
if you
sh-
need if you need track learning that bad, hop on Kart Racing Pro, hop on I don't even know what else they have. What other game? Hop on there if you want to learn a racetrack.
Watch YouTube.
Watch YouTube videos. Like,
yeah,
why go out to a racetrack and spend your money when you can hop on a simulator or hop on a PC game to learn a racetrack? Obviously,
I think
lines and breaking points or whatever, but
one more thing I want to point out,
Go
because I haven't asked you guys this yet. I had this conversation with a couple of guys this past weekend at Badger, of just because we were talking about how to police it. Like Emory said, you could ban practice for 2 weeks. They'll go 3 weeks earlier than you just to get the time in. Well, whatever it takes. That's impossible to do. But I think like what Stars does is pretty good. And I'll start with you, Emory, on this one, because you've kind of been most of the racetracks like I have in terms of kart racetracks and driven on them. For the kart tracks that can handle it, like a Newcastle, like a Trackhouse, like even a Homestead, where there's multiple layouts that are possible, and we usually do the same 2 or 3. Sure, you could practice on Thursday and Friday, but then when the heats start or when qualifying starts Saturday or Friday night, Saturday morning, they announce the actual layout for the weekend at that point.
So this is actually a really interesting discussion, because we were talking about this in the summer of 2021 before Miami Grand Nationals for the first time. And that was the initial idea that was pitched, and our understanding of it, what I felt like was going to be the idea is you practice on Thursday, 3 different layouts. You come to Friday for qualifying day, and then they tell you what the layout for the first day is going to be. And then on Saturday, they tell you what the layout of the second day is going to be. And then on Sunday, they tell you what the layout of the third day is going to be. Now, we haven't gotten that exact thing. We have a variation of it for the shootouts, but they announce it at the start of the weekend, and you just don't practice on it until then. So it's a good idea. I'd actually really love to see this at a Pro Tour round 5 and 6 because it's
Yeah.
something that Newcastle could feasibly do this. And we've seen them in the past at Summer Nats in 2020, the COVID year,
Yep.
where they had 2 weekends and 2 completely different track layouts. And back then, and I still have a little bit of a personal grudge against this, but the weekend in between, or the week in between rounds 1 through 3 of the Pro Tour and 4 through 6, they changed the layout and allowed people to rent out the track for what was going to be the race layout for the second week. And at the time, no one had driven the track backwards. Well, certain big teams that I will not list on this podcast because I don't want team bosses to get upset, decided to rent out the track.
Say the names. No, I'm playing. No,
I
but
think-
proceed.
yeah,
I can use my inference here. Proceed.
Yeah, so they rented out the track on Tuesday, and then Wednesday, another team rented out the track, one that is also very financially well off. And then official practice started on Thursday, and then you race Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So everyone else got 1 day of practice, and these other teams got a full day. So I think but the idea there, though, to get back to my main point, is that Pro Tour has the means to do it. They have the track layouts that are available to them to kind of keep us on their toes. I think it'd be a cool idea to sort of explore. And if not Pro Tour, whenever they go to Newcastle, Trackhouse is harder because the main layout is by far the most suitable for racing.
Yeah, runs
but but Newcastle, I think, is one that I want to see that idea. I think it's a really good idea, Alex.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and there's many tracks that can do it, and even the tracks that can't hold it, there's nothing wrong with going backwards every once in a while, right? Like let's say we come back to Badger the following year, let's go backwards. I think I like
Absolutely not.
there's but there's you get my point though. There's ways around it. I think it'll be interesting. Can you imagine having the Rhino liner in the first section of the racetrack?
I'd be dead. Could you imagine turn 1 going back, turn 1 being the hairpin backwards, like 4 red flags minimum. Actually, like you'd be hitting that corner at about 63 miles an hour, go straight into it, 45 carts deep. Like no one's making that out alive.
Yeah, well, Cooper Shipman agrees with us in the comments
Cooper
as well.
Yeah,
But
Cooper knows as bad as the outside was this weekend, it'd be infinitely worse if you were going backwards into that Rhino liner section.
But in general, I think like even the tracks that can't host multiple layouts, like a Trackhouse, like a Newcastle, like a Homestead can, and many other racetracks that we go to, I think if a backwards layout makes sense, then I think like that would be an option as well. There's many ways to police it without having to kind of screw the tracks by somehow not allowing drivers to go there and not giving the racetrack money or not giving the series money. There's ways around it. You can go practice all you want, and I think we just have some fun with it. Do a little pill draw for what layout we're going to do the following day. I'm just kind of spitballing ideas here, but there's ways around it. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
something. Go ahead, Emory. Finish us off
Sorry,
here.
one more quick thing. I wanted to bring this up on the flight, food, rental car, Airbnb. We can go all day on practice weekend expenses. And I was in a Facebook comment section before the Millwright shootout. And
typical Emory Lyda.
Hey man, we surf the old guy sections, we're very in tune with all levels of the internet. So
Yeah.
I was reading this, and Tony Rivera's dad was talking about the expenses to go up for Dowsman on a test weekend. And he concluded you're looking at $4,000 to $5,000 of extra money going into a test weekend. It's
That's what
just
it is.
you can't look. There are a lot of people in the karting paddock that can afford that. Just saying it like it is, but there's also a good amount of the midfield of kind of the field numbers, like the strength of the numbers, that makes or breaks a weekend for them. And I think that's why you see, as cool as the one-off events were, like the Norberg Invitational and like the Millwright race was, ultimately there's a cap on those numbers because a lot of people aren't willing to spend an extra $5,000 to go out for a test week. And I know there's a reason I didn't do it after Texas, because we spent a lot of extra money to go there and finish 31st in the main event and do an extra week of testing that really didn't help us that much. And I think the testing itself is a bit hit or miss, and I think that it's just kind of an extra barrier for cost in the sport of karting.
Yeah. Very, very, very good point. And that really throws us right into our next topic, right? We're in August. Sorry, we're not even in August yet. Sorry, we're in
Wow.
July. We're in,
Caleb's trying to
stop,
simulate this year.
stop,
Hey,
stop.
there's still KC Summer.
Stop. Let me finish. We're in July. All right. We're in July. We're at the middle of the season. The summer burnout, the season burnout. We started in January at the Winter Series. We're already halfway through the year. 6 months in. Well, that'd be 7. We just started 7th month in. We're 7 months in the season. The burnout. Emory, you're a racer yourself. I'm a racer myself, and Alex is a racer himself. We've all done karting to some respect, and that I would say that burnout is definitely real. And whenever we get this, and are we, the burnout kind of started a little bit earlier. Started in June this year. Last year it looked like it started in August. What are you guys thinking about it? How are you guys feel about the burnout here? What do we think?
I think it was bound to happen, right? With so many national level series, racing pretty, back to back to back, whether
Yeah.
or not they've done a good job of at least having that week span in between races. But guess what that week span is for? It's either to drive your hauler to the next racetrack so you could practice the week before and then get on the racetrack, or it's to drive the hauler there anyways, and then you have to fly home for 3 days, and then you come back to the next race 3 days later, 4 days later, whatever it may be. And then, you stay in the B&B, you stay in the hotel, whatever it is, until the practices start. So I think it's a good segue from our practice debate, because in terms of, even if you have that week off from, race to race, if you want to do that practice, all of a sudden it becomes race, practice, rinse and repeat all year long. So from January to July, I was getting a phone call there. I'm so sorry. I went through my computer. It scared me.
Is it important? Is it someone important, Alex?
Oh, I didn't.
It's got to be Bubs, bro.
Did
It's got to be Bubs.
Did that go through? Did that go through the stream?
No, but it's got to be
Oh,
Bubs.
okay.
Bro.
It was.
For those of you guys that don't know, Bubs is Alex's girlfriend. So
yeah, he found this out last week and would not let it go, bro.
We've got the two biggest polar opposites that were roommates last weekend.
dude, Emory, you don't even know. And this is so off topic. We're so sorry. We're having a super serious conversation here, but I'm taking it off topic here. Alex was in the shower and he wouldn't hurry up, and then I see his phone start to
Typical.
bzz, bzz, and I'm like, all right, like, who can it be? And I just see Bubs, and I'm like, yo, Alex, bro, who the hell is Bubs? And then he's like, that's my girlfriend, bro. Answer. And then I answered, and I was like, hey, who this is?
Hey,
And it was
Alex,
Bubs.
Alex, you trust Caleb a lot more than I do with your phone.
Anyways,
Well,
back in, boys. Reel back in.
We're back. We're
Okay.
back. But I think my point is basically we're kind of on like a rinse and repeat cycle of race, practice, race, drive the hauler somewhere, test, practice. We've been doing this since Homestead of the SCUSA Winter Series, and now we're in July, and it feels like we haven't stopped moving. I know the boys and I, even on the broadcast crew, it's like it's a lot of work, but I can't imagine what it's like for the teams to have to haul their camper over, get everything set up again, set it all up, tear it all down every weekend, get all the mechanics out there. The drivers are tired, the team owners are tired, the series are tired, the tracks are tired, the track owners, sorry. So I think it's one of those things where it's this kind of started back in, I'd say, 2020 when COVID kind of hit, and the sport of racing as a whole was kind of like the first sport to really get back underway, and we wanted to go racing, and it feels like every year since 2020 we've been adding races, more and more series are in the mix, which I'm all for. I think more series, more people driving, awesome. But this kind of where it's developed is now all of a sudden every year we're trying to add upon the schedule from last year.
Yeah.
We're trying to, be the best, and it's one of those things where I think we're finding ourselves in this awkward spot of we're racing a lot, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
We might be racing a lot too soon in the year.
Yeah. One of the things I can say, we do have like a little bit of a drop off. Obviously, the summer picks up with all the national series because all the kids are out of school and whatnot. But I mean, out of all people, I think myself and the production crew, I guess the guys that are here every weekend, we get it. Like I won't lie. I will be completely honest about how I felt this past week. I was a little burnt, after Pittsburgh. I obviously raced and I'm not racing all the time, but I was supposed to be like a decompress, and it wasn't that way because you're either spending money, tires and whatnot, and then you turn around, pick up our entire setup, put it in our trailer, and then you drive out to the next event, which was Wisconsin for us, 8-hour drive, for all of us. And that's a drive. And then you could have a mechanical issue on the way there, and you could either blow a tire. Not saying that any of that happened to us, but it has happened before, and I can only imagine for the teams with the haulers and whatnot, that all gets stressful. And then you move from track to track, you pick up, you tear down. And I do give a lot of credit to all three of the big series and all of the regional series that really came together and got on the
100%.
same page this year, wherever we're starting to have everything, instead of going from all the way from Orlando all the way to Houston, and then from Houston you go all the way to I don't know, somewhere super far in the east, wherever you're making 16-hour trips back and forth. It starts to get a little bit closer together. We go to Stars this next week. It's a little bit of a drive from Wisconsin, obviously, for Stars. I think it's like 8-hour drive, 8-hour plus drive to MCC, and then from there you go to Newcastle, which is 2 hours. So everything gets a lot closer, and everything kind of, you bounce around from place to place, but it's a lot closer than what it was last year. You don't have to go from either Indiana back to all the way to North Carolina, and then from North Carolina you either end up going to Wisconsin or wherever it is. So big credit to all the series that came together this year and wanted to make it more affordable for the big teams, for whoever was flying, and you wouldn't have to bounce around from so much. But it's definitely, the burnout is definitely real. All of us feel it. I've been I think I've only missed one race this year, and even then there's some people in the paddock who are at it every single weekend. There's coaches, there's drivers, and there's other stuff that they're at a racetrack every single weekend. That stuff's really, it's real. You know what I mean? And you have a break. Clubs may have a little bit of a break, but it's definitely that burnout is starting to be felt a little bit around the paddock.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too, last year I felt like I pushed the boundaries as much as I could with my schedule, because I did every single one of the Trackhouse Club races. I did a couple weekends of testing on it. I did pretty much all of Stars. I did a couple USPKS races, and I did IME Grands. And there was a total of 31 weekends last year that I was at a racetrack. And mind you, the last part of the year is very spread out. Once you get to about mid-October, you really only have 2 weekends, right? Chase Lee going on 8 weeks straight right now, and I know a lot of people are in a
SSKC
pretty
this
similar
weekend
boat.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, SSKC this weekend. You have Stars next weekend.
Route this
There's
weekend as
a
well.
number of
Club race this weekend.
There's a number. Yeah, it's like there's 2 non-national weekends this month, and there's a lot of club races around those weekends. And then you get to August, and it's kind of the same thing. You have Rotax in Pittsburgh. You have a couple other club races the first weekend of August. Then we have USPKS round 4. You have a weekend off where there's more club races and testing for IME Grand Nationals. Then IME Grand Nationals, and then you get into the Newcastle phase of the schedule. Like there's no break. I think for the national schedules as well. I think we've had the discussion. I think that Xander's had this discussion on Happy Hour as well, where we get 5 races to me is a bit much for USPKS. I think 3 to 4 national races is kind of the more optimal level for a schedule. And additionally, because we started the season in April, which from my understanding was kind of more of a logistical concern for them as opposed to a full-on like personal choice. But because we started the season in April for USPKS, the only series that we ran before the end of March were the Winter Series stuff, as well as one round of Pro Tour. And then conversely, the only national race we're running after the end of September is Rock Vegas and Supernats. So it's like you're talking about 12 weeks there where we're really not using the climate or we're really not taking advantage of potential weekends. And yes, there's school and whatnot, but the numbers in the Winter Series and the numbers in the early parts of the year would indicate that really you're not losing that much from the school year. So
Yeah.
to me, I think that it's one of those things that like we could do better to spread out the schedule. There's maybe a race or two that I would take out, and I don't know. It's always going to be an industry with burnout, but I feel like we could do more to kind of minimize that.
Yeah, and I'm also like almost positive that if I or anybody was to miss a weekend, you would kind of miss it, the very next and want to go
100%, yeah.
straight back, because that's who we are. We're race car drivers, and we want to be at a racetrack every weekend. It does get a bit tiring sometimes, but whenever you take a racer out of a racetrack for one weekend, he's gonna want to go right back the next week. So that's all I can pretty much say. Alex, anything to add here?
Yeah, no, I second everything you guys said for sure.
Alrighty, well, boys, anything else to talk about here as we reach our 1 hour 10-minute mark on the show, or are we ready to put our super supportive fans to sleep here?
I think
I want to talk about the marbles.
Oh yeah. Oh, dude, that's the last thing we have planned here, and I forgot because I have a clip here. Emory, thank you so much for reminding me because I almost forgot. Thank you so much. But we talked about everything offline. Emory, go ahead and take us through it, because we saw how treacherous it was this weekend in Badger and pretty much the past couple of weeks as well. MCC was pretty bad with marbles, as well as a couple other racetracks.
Yeah, so first off, I'm going to keep this pretty short because I know Alex wants to talk about something else as well. But this is Ryan Norberg's view at the end of the main event on Sunday. And thankfully, Norberg's all right. Obviously, if you're unaware of what happened, Alexander Searle blew his engine coming to the start-finish line. And so you can see as Norberg gets up, Searle has his hand up. He realizes that there's an issue. He's trying to adjust the carb. Norberg and Terlecki kind of make a little bit of bumper-to-bumper contact. But at this point, Norberg has not made contact with either of the two drivers. And goes off on the marbles, and once you get in the marbles, you're toast. Offline was very little grip into the barriers. Unfortunately, a rat succumbed to injuries and ultimately had a fatality in that incident. So rest in peace to the rat. But as far as the incident goes, I felt like it was a good demonstration of just how little grip was offline. And unfortunately, I was a firm representation of this as well in the KA final. I didn't want to clip the video for 2 reasons. My GoPro is currently not with me. And second off, I didn't want to show just how embarrassing and stupid that incident was on live camera. So you won't see that. But this marble topic seems to be something that I've noticed since the new tire compound came in. We saw it in Cincinnati. We saw it a bit in Texas, a bit in Trackhouse. But this weekend was the worst it's been. And in talking to a few of the guys around the paddock, and especially guys under our own tent, we felt like this was as much marble buildup as we've ever seen around a track like Dowsman. And it really meant that if you went offline, you were done for like a lap and a half. And also, it meant that the way that you raced people, you could kind of play it kind of like a game of Stack Cup if you know what that game is, if you know, you know. where you're kind of trying to hurt the other driver behind you. And so what you do is you pass them, you put them offline, and then suddenly you have a pack of go-karts behind them that are attacking them, or they have significantly less grip. And so to me, it changed the way you raced. It made the offline a lot more dirty, and it meant that you had to be careful because you don't want to be like Ryan Norberg at the end of the final, or like myself in a much less pressure-filled situation.
Yeah, I think the best example that we had of the marbles like on stream all weekend was the Vasquez incident, where it was a pretty routine overtake from Mick Gabriel on the inside of turn number 1, and Vasquez simply drove off the racetrack just because of what it was like to be offline. We saw,
Sorry to interrupt. Norberg's race start as well was
yeah,
pretty much.
you just
I
got
hate to say it, but it was atrocious.
well,
Starting on the outside.
he just got held there, which is
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised that didn't happen more often. I think it was just one of those things where Ryan got great starts in the heat races and didn't get as good of a start in the final to where he can get down low. And once you're stuck on the outside, we saw it all weekend long. Very rarely did a guy in second place end up first. Usually ended up third, fourth, or fifth or worse, and every single heat and even the feature race. Emory said it best, right? Just for and to clarify, for most of us here, for all of us here, we're all drivers, and for most of us watching, have either driven or been around racing. Like marbles are not a new thing, right? Marbles are at every racetrack ever. It's just it happens over the course of a weekend. It's build up, it's rubber off the tire, and it develops offline. But kind of our point is, recently it seems as though we saw a little bit in speed sports, but a lot at Trackhouse, a lot at MCC, and then it was the worst I think I've ever seen it here at Badger Kart Club. And it's I don't want to say a head scratcher as to why, because it's just one of those things where potentially it's the new compound, potentially it's a bit of a surface thing, but it's not like the surface of Badger's bad. It's pretty much brand new. The repave was last year, I think, Emory 2023.
Yeah.
And the Rhino liner has been in place for 7 or so years now, so the surface is fairly smooth if you walk it. But for some reason recently we're just burning a whole lot of rubber, putting it off the racetrack, and it's making it difficult. I think it's making the racing awesome, but it's making it a lot tougher out there.
I'm going to say something real quick, and don't hate me if you're a USPKS official watching this video, but there was full-on a discussion about if you're coming in on the in-lap, pick up marbles. I have never heard that in a karting race, that picking up marbles is an effective strategy to gain weight. I've heard it in a kart or in a car race when there's a lot more marbles discarded on a much larger track, but to hear that in a kart racing weekend was pretty wild because there was that much rubber buildup that it was an effective strategy. So yeah, I think that ultimately it's the amount of marbles, like you said, it's a bit of a head scratcher. It's certainly changed a little bit of the dynamic of starts where it's like if you're all flying at Dowsman, like with Norberg's start, like with Garrison, even when he got past once, it was like he was suddenly human for half a lap because he was on marbles, he was offline. You know, you get stuck off the line and it's so hard to overcome. So
Yeah.
that's my thing with the marbles. I felt like it was extremely treacherous.
Yeah. Alex, I saw you looking at the comments. Anything you want to look at here?
Oh no, I was just reading it. I think it's an interesting perspective to mention of, if I think we practice too much, then to stay off the racetrack. But if the practice, like my point is, if the practice is readily available to me, I'm gonna take it because I feel like I have to. So my point is, we should do our best to not allow so much practice more on the Thursdays. You can't really police the week before. If you want to get to the week before and go test all you want, that's fine because the track will be totally different the next week. But it's really like that Wednesday, that Thursday unofficial practice time where the track is similar enough to what you'll see over the course of a weekend to where it's actually beneficial, and it's just much more costly as we've seen from all the comments throughout the show of just how much more it's going to cost you. If you want to go for a test weekend, it's $4 or $5 extra out of your pocket, which is just something that a lot of people can't really afford to put on the table. So for me, I think if it's available, people feel like they have to do it. I think we should try our best to start getting rid of the 8 to 10 practices we do before the actual qualifying sessions every week.
Yeah. So lastly here on our agenda, before I cut almost a third of our show here short earlier, our last topic that we have here is X30 or any of the pro categories too difficult to come in as a privateer? And Alex, we'll start with you.
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit, right? I don't want to keep, beating this into the ground a little bit, but the practice thing. If you're a big team and can afford to go practice, of course you're going to do it. If you're a privateer that is pretty much saved up the first half of the year to go run an X30 race at a national level, you probably did not budget for a weekend before testing, the Wednesday testing. You might have budgeted for the Thursday and the Friday practice. So that is issue one to me as a newcomer who wants to go from, especially the K to the X30. You don't really see much, Briggs to X30 jump. And if you're an X30 junior driver, it's different. If you're X30 junior to senior, it's not a whole lot. I'm more referencing the KA senior level to the Briggs senior level into an X30 senior. You look at the entries, right? And if you look at this USPKS weekend, for example, and look at the entries, what we had, 17 drivers? It seems small, and it is actually a small number of X30s for a weekend that we are kind of accustomed to seeing. Even though most of the year we've been hovering around the 20-25 number, that field was stacked this weekend. I mean, there was about 12 guys you can look at and say, like, they are X30 Pro Senior winners and could have won this weekend heading into the weekend. Obviously, we learned pretty early on that it was a Garrison versus Norberg sort of race weekend all throughout, besides the final that we saw. But I want to give my hats off, first of all, to Eli Warren on an outstanding job all weekend long. We saw a couple of guys do pretty well. Quentin McPherson did very well. Alex Feldstein did very well as well. Considering the limited experience they have in the X30 side of things on the senior level. That being said, I think Eli Warren put it best, right? The differences when we asked him in the interview between KA and X30, usually drivers will say, well, it's a bit of a driving style difference and whatnot. There's more drivers in KA. I think the point that he made of in KA, you can kind of afford to make a pass wherever you want on the racetrack, and you can bank on the guy in front of you dropping a tire, making a mistake, or just racing, because that's just the level. That's just how the KA drivers are, because you have to. In the X30 level, there's less of them, but I think I can say this at a higher level, or at least more drivers at a higher level in the X30 Pro Senior category. And so for Eli's point, he said, I felt like I had to calculate my moves, because if I made a pass, I'm losing a second to the guy in front of me, and it's almost impossible to get it back because they're not going to drop a tire. They're not going to make a mistake. And that's why, if you look at them, look who was fastest this weekend on a technical racetrack that took maybe the most, I'd say, driver's skill heading into a weekend that we've seen all year long, because we don't go here very often or at all in the sake of a national scene. Garrison and Norberg, 1 and 2 all weekend long. 2 of, if not the most experienced drivers we have on the X30 Pro grid, right? And then it was DeTulio, then it was Keeble, right? Which DeTulio, I was joking with him about being a veteran. I mean, this is his 4th senior year. He's only 18. So that goes to show you. He just turned 18.
No, he's 17.
He just turned 18.
He just turned 18.
When?
He just turned 18.
He just turned 18. Harley Keeble, 17.
I'll bet $20 on it right
fake
now.
Fake friend. Anyways, so yeah, the level. I mean, look at Brandon Lemke, for example, the hometown kid, home track. Who knows? There was some outside struggles for Lemke besides just overall pace, because we know Lemke's capable of winning any X30 senior race possible. But for a driver like him to struggle to be inside the top 12, for DeMello to struggle to be inside the top 10 for a lot of the weekend, I think as a driver, and Emory, you could probably allude to this as well, as a KA driver, especially in the senior level, looking to make that jump up, I think it's daunting. I wouldn't want to make that jump. I know on surface level, the costs are actually pretty identical, but when you really dive in, that's when all of a sudden the costs start to skyrocket, because to compete with the bigger teams, you got to run with them. And that's where things get difficult. And so we had this talk before the show, and you can allude to it as well, but I think Emory's power might have gone out again because he froze. But oh, he's back. Okay, good. Because I want to hear this from Emory's point of view. We talked about it before the show. There's actually an argument to be made, and this might be a little controversial, that to jump in a K or an X30, it's not too different to be maybe half a second off to a second off of, a pole lap. I'd say in a KA, you can go out there, especially if you're a Briggs guy, the driving, level in terms of what it takes to actually drive a KA. You have to be smooth and whatnot and roll the speed. You could be 5/10 off, and that might put you mid pack. If you're 5/10 off in the X30, which I think is like we were saying this before the show. If you have driving experience, if you give them enough time in the go kart, they could probably be 5/10 off. Maybe like a Ryan or an Austin Garrison, if you give them enough time on a weekend. 5/10 off will put you maybe last in that USPKS field. And so to me, like that's one of those things. Besides it all, another thing before I give it to you, Emory, what these X30 Pro senior guys are doing that's just different than what we see in any other class. They're consistently running, for example, in Garrison Norberg's case, 44.5s, 44.6s, fastest laps we've seen in Badger every lap for 25 laps straight. That's the consistency level. That's the difference to me, and why being a driver looking to make that step up, I think it's a bit frightening.
See, my whole thing on this is, as you said, right? You can jump in an X30 and be half a second off pretty much right away, right? And have literal proof of this. I jumped in a cart to do a little bit of coaching this past week. First time I've been in an X30 for more than a session in 8 years, and a completely new cart to me. It was a comp cart. Never driven it before, and within the end of the day, I was running more or less within 3 to 4 tenths of what I should have been running on that day. More like probably 3 tenths off, right? And this is against people that like know the track really well, really consistent, whatever. So in terms of actually driving the X30 package, to get one lap in, to get a few laps in, not that difficult. To race an X30, the racecraft required and kind of the mental fortitude to run it is significantly more difficult. And that's one of the things that Eli Warren mentioned. That's where I think the jump up can be a bit daunting. I will say, to me, you have about 25 drivers that I think run in KA right now in like the national pool of drivers. They might not all show up to one weekend, but I'd put about 25 drivers in a hat that I could say, if they were to run X30, they would be respectable midfielders, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you could talk about that. You could put Jesus Vasquez, Fernando Luque, down the list. I mean, there's Aiden
Emory
Rudolph.
Lyda.
Like, there's,
Well,
I don't know about
Aiden,
that.
Aiden,
Isenbard,
Aiden Levy,
Iser,
Aiden
like,
Levy's
the
done it.
list goes,
Aiden Levy has gone
Yeah.
up.
yeah, like all of those guys could run, but ultimately, to get to Garrison and Norberg's level is significantly harder. It's like going from
Oh no,
This guy was about to spill the beans here, and we lost him.
the secret sauce. Well, it's all gone now. Oh man, we have to. Is there a storm going on in Mooresville, or is Emory just?
Dude, I don't even know what's going
Does
on.
Emory got to call?
Right now.
Does Emory got to call AT&T here?
Oh,
What's
he's
going
back.
on?
What were you going for? You left us with the dramatic pause.
So, anyways, there's a lot of guys in K that could slot, I would say, right into the 3rd through 12th mix. People forget
Correct.
Nick Terlecki only had one national podium in KA before he moved up to X30. He's got 3 since then. The jump to be competitive, and by competitive, I mean running towards the front in X30 is not as much as people would think it is. The jump to be all the way at the front against the Norbergs and Garrisons and do it consistently weekend after weekend after weekend is a lot. And it's daunting, and the amount of money that you need to spend to get there makes it to where guys like Eli Warren, guys like myself back in the day when I was kind of a KA exclusive driver, not really worth it. And I think that that's the big thing. Until that changes, I feel like the field size is going to be about the same. But to Alex's point, though, doing it consistently lap after lap, you can't bank on the racing diluting the product. You can't bank on the attrition that you see in the KA side of things, and you can't bank on other guys like a Norberg or a Garrison making those mistakes. In the midfield, to me, it's no different than a KA race. You're going to see guys making racecraft errors. You're going to see guys making some errors. They're still really good drivers. The midfield in the X30 class is still extremely good, better than midfield in the KA class, but a lot of the front guys in KA could end up in X30, and with the right amount of testing could be there pretty simply.
Yeah. Alex, anything else?
I think we've covered it. I don't want to keep repeating because I think like that's those are the main points. It has nothing to do with a lot of drivers can make that jump and be quick to that midfield level, but I think to get to that top level, it takes more than just being incredibly quick in the seats. It takes a lot of homework, takes a lot of money, and that just comes with seat time, comes with continuing to tune the engines, get all that package better, and that's where you'll hear people kind of say the jump from K to X30 is a lot more money. Like I mentioned, it's actually not that much different over the course of a weekend.
It's the testing money.
That's what's going to kill you.
Yeah. Most definitely. Lastly, we do have a star to comment here from Chuck Frank, and this is going to be super quick. I'll leave it at 2-3 minutes max. Do drivers like the new tire or not? It's the tire that's laying down the rubber. Obviously, a little bit of a softer compound. The MG Yellow, speaking of Ryan at the start of the year, he said that he felt like it was almost harder than the last compound, but they obviously, Emory, correct me if I'm wrong, they use like a different, it's more of like a pure, like actual rubber than a synthetic,
More of
like
a natural
plastic.
rubber.
More of a natural rubber. So lays down a little more. It's a little softer and lays down the grip. I've heard pretty good reviews. I personally like the new compound because the Avinco Blues are also different, which is what we use here in Texas and what they use across SCUSA, and then you guys use the MG Reds, obviously. I personally, I like the new rubber. I think the old was still pretty good, but the new rubber I think is pretty fine to me. Emory, you obviously drive in the 2-cycle. I don't think Alex has driven the new compound yet or at all because he's too good for karts now. But kidding.
Yeah.
But anyways, Emory, you have driven the new compound at an actual race weekend. What are your thoughts on it? And do you think it's good for racing, or what do you think about it?
It's fun to drive. I think it certainly having a softer tire. I mean, most people aren't going to complain about that, but I feel like, man, for a KA class, for a Swift class, whatever, I think we need harder tires.
Yeah.
I feel like the MG Red from 2 iterations ago, the one with the kind of like white logo on the sidewall that had natural rubber, was like the perfect compound for KA racing and for kind of the 100cc to 60cc racing. And you could get more wear out of them. To me, it still was a soft enough compound that you weren't sliding all over the place, and there was still a lot of natural grip you could find from the tires. And like right now, like the amount of tires you have to use in a race weekend for K is really no different than an X30. You're still burning through 4 or 5 sets a weekend, up to 6 almost if you really want to be aggressive with it. But you have to run at least session 2, session 4 new tires if you want to get a proper read on the kart compared to your competition. And there's drivers that are good enough to overcome that. Certainly there's guys that don't want to spend that money, and a lot of times they'll make it up. But like it's just a fact that the new tire being hard or being softer takes away some of the off throttle time. It doesn't differentiate the field as much. I don't think there's as much of a need for such a soft compound. But hey, it's not me making the decision.
Have you felt that the new compound is temperature driven? Because it seems as though, like, I was talking with a couple of the guys in the X30 like senior class, where they're losing to Ryan and Garrison was really off the start. Those first 2 or 3 laps, they were able to bank 1.3 seconds, and then from the rest of the race, it was kind of a dead heat between the top 3, top 5. But it seems as though I think this new compound might be a little bit more. You better getting the heat in the tires early is important. Otherwise, you can kind of ruin it pretty early on, and then you'll kind of see like a pretty top end driver struggle throughout the heat races because they kind of ruin the tire early on in their cycle.
Yeah, well, and I also think like the new yellow seems to be very temperature sensitive. Like how you bring in the tire the first 5 laps and how you control the temperatures directly influences how the tire is going to run the rest of the session. And to be honest, I haven't driven enough. Like I said, I only did the 1 day of testing at Trackhouse on X30, and I like driving it, but I could tell that you kind of had to nurse it in a bit more. Whereas the new red, if you go out there 3 corners later, you have normal grip. Badger was a bit different because of how slick the first part of the track is, but in general, you can build heat in those tires really quickly. And to me, the natural rubber is going to have more temperature sensitive readings on it to where you have to control the temperatures better. but I don't know. I think that part's fine. I enjoy a challenge where you kind of have to get the temperatures in the right window. I just wish, at least on the K side of things, it was a bit of a harder tire.
Yeah. Yeah, we had this discussion earlier on in the year about should like this not slower classes, but like Briggs up to I say KA should have harder
Yeah, I
compounds.
remember.
So
Yeah.
so I agree with that, Emory.
There's
Yeah.
no reason that Briggs should be on a Vega red or an MG red or an MG yellow.
100%.
No reason. Or a Venko blue, Caleb.
I don't know. I think it works fine. If you want to
I
go,
think you just can't.
if stop. If we go stiffer, I think that would be cool. I still think the Vega Red's a little too soft. Little too soft for Briggs racing, in my opinion.
I think the MG orange is the perfect tire compound for Briggs.
Could be.
Personally.
Could be. The world may never know, and this will be everything to find out in episode 18 of KC Grid Talk. What were you gonna say about Hoosier? Did
The
you power go
R80s?
out?
Damn,
You talking
my
about the
internet again
R80s?
went goodbye. Yeah,
The R80s? Yeah.
Hoosier R80s. You want to
Elite
grow
tire.
some chest hair? That's the way.
Elite tire.
That's how you grow chest hair.
I'm telling you,
I'll show you my
tire-
chest hair, pal. No, I'm playing.
that tire taught me how to drive.
Yo.
I actually, I thank the Hoosier R80 quite often, actually, to my ability to be able to actually drive a go-kart. And even like
Yo, I'm
even
gonna
the
set
old.
up a
Do you
shop.
remember? Do you remember the, what was it? The YLCs,
Bridgestone Wild Seas.
Bridgestones? Those were
Yeah.
also a hard compound.
The new iteration of the Wild Seas, like from 2019, that's where it got like really hard. Or wait, it was like the what was it? YLM was the X30 tire, I thought, and then Wild Seas was the harder compound.
Yeah.
But no, the Hoosier R80s and the Hoosier EL26s were like next level.
I have no idea what you guys are yapping about here.
Hey, well, bro. Yeah, see, Caleb's had it easy in his life of driving Briggs. He's never had to drive a tire that is basically a round brick.
I've driven rental carts before, bro. What do you mean?
Rental cart though, like it's so heavy, it doesn't matter what tire you're on, it's always gonna feel like sluggish.
I've driven a rental cart with Evenco Blues on it. That thing can rip.
Have you driven a cart with a lot of power on a really hard tire?
No.
See, I've driven a KA100 on a Hoosier EL26, which is pretty similar to an R80. Let me tell you, that was not fun to do. I've never come off of track feeling more depressed than I did after that session, but I think it'd be great for the racing.
Yep. Well, anything else to add here, boys, before we go to sleep here?
No, I've yapped too much.
Alex, you good?
Yeah, same here.
Well, round of applause. Episode 17, done and dusted. Well in the books. We thank you guys very much for joining us here on this episode where we talked about a lot, and it was good topics. Everything from practice, from tire compounds, to your winners from this past weekend. But for myself, Kaleb Viesca, and Emory Lyda, we thank you very much for joining us here this weekend. We go back to back-to-back weekends this weekend with Route 66 Championship this weekend at Whiteland Raceway Park. Our very own Zaner Clemens, Big Red, are going to be there, and then myself and Trevor Blue are going to be at the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati for the club race weekend. Club race this weekend. So thank you very much for joining us. This has been KC Grid Talk number 17.